Hey friends, welcome to our weekly Data Talk, a show where we talk with data science leaders from around the world. My name is Mike Delgado. We're chatting with Peter Gray. He's a Senior Vice President of the Advanced Technology Group at NTT. He just got back from the Tour de France, where he is the head of the data science team, handling all the cycling analytics, stuff you see on TV, all the insights, predictions, all this is coming from Peter's team. Peter, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Great to talk to you.
So before we started the podcast, we were just chatting about cycling. So I want to know, Peter, when did you first get into cycling?
I got into it probably like quite a lot of people, my age. I think probably in my, probably about 10 years ago, I had a shoulder operation. I used to play field hockey and, busted up my shoulder and, couldn't do that for a year. And then some of my friends were starting to get into road cycling. And I thought, oh, well, that might be the way I can, stay fit while I wasn't allowed to keep playing hockey for 12 months, and then sort of got into it and been doing it ever since.
That's so cool. I love seeing your bikes in the background. So this is your office. So do you cycle to work or on your breaks?
Well, the beauty is I run a global team. So my team are geographically distributed all over the world. So that means actually I work primarily from home. So this is my home office, studio, bike storage. So yeah.
It's beautiful. I love it. Well, I love being in a garage. I love being around bikes, the smell of bikes. So it's so cool that you're living the data science world, but you have the bikes right next to you. So that is so cool. It's very fitting for the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. I'm one of these very fortunate people who get to, combine my hobby and sport passion with my career and my corporate work.
So, and this is like a special podcast for me because I love the data side and I also love cycling. So before we get into the data conversation, I wanted to find out what's kind of your kind of cycling routine. How do you what do you like to ride and how much are you doing?
I'm what you'd probably call a keen recreational rider. And so, I will go out, a few times a week with a group of friends who live nearby, and we'll do some road rides, most, early in the morning, before everybody has to go to work and all that kind of stuff. But I've also been getting much more into gravel riding and cyclocross. And so actually I just sent my gravel bike off this morning to get it serviced ready for a couple of weeks, which I'm looking forward to. And I've been getting my older son, my 15-year-old boy, out on the bike a bit as well. We've done a couple of cyclocross races together, and we're going to do a 10-day ride together in a couple of months. So we'll start training for that soon.
That is so cool. That is so cool. It's so funny. I mentioned the gravel bike to my wife. My wife was like, "Really? Another bike?"
Well, I reckon it's my most fun bike. Gravel bike.
Wow. And that's so cool. You got your son involved in cycling too. That is awesome.
Yeah. So cycling is a great way to connect with people, whether it be your friends or whether it be, in my case, I'm, trying to connect with my 15-year-old son, which is always an important thing to do in life. And so it's a great way to connect, on the bike, having a chat as you ride along together. No
doubt. Yeah. Some of my best memories and great conversations have happened on a bike trail, because there's so much to see and, even through all the injuries and everything, just great memories and fun conversations. So, I love cycling just like you. So tell me about your background. How did you get involved with the Tour de France?
Yeah, so my background is data. So for years and years, I've been involved in helping, mostly large corporate organizations with data problems. Back in the early days of, things like data warehousing and business intelligence and all that type of stuff, I've been involved in implementing that, those solutions, with different organizations around the world. But in terms of how things happen with the Tour de France, the dimension data as it was at the time, we're starting to have some conversations with ASO, who are the owners of the Tour de France, and the conversation was very much around wanting to bring a richer data environment to the Tour de France, and particularly to leverage IoT data into the Tour de France and implement live tracking and analytics. And so I was probably fortunate to be in the right place at the right time when in our organisation we looked around and, where do we have the knowledge and the skills that could potentially implement that? And my name came up, so I ended up being involved in this program right from day one, which was back in 2015, and we had some initial meetings with the ASO, and the ASO are the organisers of the Tour de France. We had some initial meetings with them in January 2015, and by July 2015, we had implemented a whole live tracking and real-time analytics platform that went live at that Tour de France, which was a busy. You can imagine how chaotic that was, trying to work through that in such a short time frame.
That is insane. That is insane. I can't even imagine the amount of work involved to do all of that. Tell me about your setup when you arrive there, because you're there, you're having to get everything put into place, the sensors. Like, tell me about your process when you arrive.
Yeah, so the environment for us is, we've got sensors that are installed on the bikes, and those sensors are sending data every second. There's a whole transmission network that is integrated in with the television broadcast, and so the signal is bounced via an aeroplane that circles over the race and bounces down to the race finish line. And so we're basically integrated into the whole infrastructure of the race. So the Tour de France is this incredible moving circus, and the technology zone and the broadcast zone is made up of, we've got about 100 different trucks that all travel to every finish line of the Tour de France, and they cover, the television outside broadcast and production, all of the RF transmission requirements. We have our own on-site power, telecommunications and networking, and then broadcasters from all around the world, bring their vehicles and their teams, and so you just have this incredible environment that's basically a sea of trucks and a sea of cables. Connected together. It's like this incredible jigsaw, and so we turn up into that environment, and we work very closely with the other groups that are there, with the France TV, who do the primary broadcast, with Euromedia, who provide all of the RF transmission, and they manage the sensors and deploy those out to the teams, the cycling teams themselves. So we give sensors out to each of the teams, and the team mechanics are responsible for fitting those onto the bikes. So when we arrive at the tour, we usually get there a few days in advance, having already done a full live trial at one of the earlier races in the season, the Criterion de Dauphiné, which happens in June, and then we turn up to the Tour de France. And there's 2 days that are allocated for that whole technology zone to set up. Sort of first day is usually everybody setting up. Second day is then starting to test and just make sure everything's working. And then day 3, you're live.
Wow. Oh, my word. That is intense pressure. Gee whiz. Just to get all that and making sure that all the sensors are working properly. Are they all battery powered, like they have to be charged up ahead of time? Yeah,
so the sensors, basically the team gets given each cycling team gets given a kit of sensors and a charging station, and so each night the mechanics will take the sensors off the bikes, just plug them into the charging station. We're now sort of 5 years down that journey with the teams on having that live tracking, and so we're now at a good operational rhythm with them. When we were in the first year, it took a bit of getting used to, and mechanics getting used to fitting these things, and riders unsure about, well, why are we doing this, and all of those types of things. Now we're at a point where everybody knows what's happening. They know how it works. and it really just happens, fairly much by clockwork. But they, there's always some little, tricky things, like somebody will be running a special time trial bike and they can't figure out how to fit the sensor onto that particular type of seat post, or they'll be running GoPros as well sometimes, and the GoPro interferes with where the sensor is going to mount. And some of these little things that happen that you just need to work around.
What sort of data are you gathering from these sensors on the bikes?
So for the Tour de France, we capture the GPS location, so a longitude and latitude, and a speed. And then obviously, key information allows us to connect that all together, like a timestamp, an ID, unique ID for that sensor. So it's actually quite it's a very simple piece of information. There are other solutions, and we've implemented solutions that allow us to capture more data, such as heart rate and power and cadence and those types of metrics. But for the Tour de France, the agreement that's in place with the teams is that the information that we can share is just the locations and the speeds, because obviously some of that other information is quite sensitive in terms of the competition. But what we do with that very simple data is that as that flows through, it runs into our real-time streaming platform, and that streaming analytics environment starts to connect that up with other data sources. So we map that sensor ID to a rider. We map that geographic location to a point on the course. And so now we know, for example, what's the distance from the start, what's the distance to the finish. We map that based on that location on the course. We can identify the gradient of the road at that point. We make a separate call out to a weather service, a highly localized weather service, that then allows us to identify for that location, for that rider at that point in time, this is the wind conditions, this is the temperature, this is, whether there's precipitation, etc. And so we start to build out all of the context around what's happening for that rider. And then obviously we can position that rider relative to all of the other riders in the race. So we can identify, what order they are, within the race, are they first, second, third, fourth. And we can start to also calculate all of the time and distance gaps between them. And we can cluster riders together into groups. So as you watch professional cycling, you'll see that riders ride in groups, and that's for aerodynamic advantage. And so the way that we typically summarize a race is about talking about the different groups on the road. And so using clustering, we can based on their locations, we cluster riders together into those different groups. And so what it means is that at the end of that streaming pipeline, we've gone from having this very small data set, and we now have a very rich data set, because we're also doing other aggregations and calculations. We end up with over 30 data points from the three that we started with.
Wow, that's amazing. So you're able to, even as they're kind of being grouped together, and there's that aerodynamic advantage of being in a cluster like that, you're then able to kind of even make predictions based on like placement where they're at in the cluster.
Yeah, so we actually have one of the models that we've created is an effort index, and basically what that's doing is just identifying, based on the speed and the gradient and their position within the group and the size of that group, how hard they're working. And we try to express that in actually a very simple metric, between 1 and 10. And so, 10 is, they're going absolutely flat out. They couldn't go any harder. 0 is they're not even turning the pedals. They've stopped for a coffee. And then obviously, everywhere in between. And what that allows us to do is to help explain things like what the effort is like for somebody who's in a breakaway group versus the effort for somebody who's sitting comfortably within the peloton. And so, often you will see, some statistics that'll say things like the effort index currently for the breakaway group is 8 out of 10, while for the riders in the peloton, it's 6 out of 10. Just to give that indication, they're traveling at the same speed, but for the riders in the peloton, they're getting a much easier ride.
Oh, that's fascinating. Have there been any interesting insights you gained by kind of like, over the last 4 years, 5 years of like watching this, tracking this data, things you've been like, oh, that's really interesting to see that data correlation?
I think some of the stuff that we've been doing this year in particular that actually has been quite fascinating is some more detailed profiles of not just riders, but of teams. So, starting to look at the influence of team performance on the race. So one of the pieces of work that we've evolved over the years is creating these rider profiles. So we take their history of performance over the past 5 years, looking at how they've performed in all UCI races. So not just the Tour de France. We take actually the results from every race that's happened in the last 5 years. We look at things like the course, the nature of the course for those races, and we start to build profiles for each rider and look at where are their strengths and where are their weaknesses. These riders are great at time trials. This rider is clearly a sprinter. This rider performs well in medium mountains where there's an uphill finish, etc. So we start to for each of these different types of races, we create an index to score how good or bad they are at that particular style of race based on their historical results. And then we build out a profile for them. And again, we create, we use clustering again to create, clusters of riders of similar types of riders. And then by doing that, then we start looking at the team. And so each team in the Tour de France will have 8 riders. And we start to look at, well, what does each team look like? What types of riders are they taking to the Tour de France, and what types of teams and what profiles of teams are more successful than others? And then the other factors we start introducing into that are things like how long have riders been with that team, and how often have those particular riders ridden together. So one of the really interesting things this year was that I really enjoyed was being able to look at, for each team, their stability and how tightly clustered the riders were. So, our premise was that, teams that have ridden together and have a really solid group and stable group of riders who know each other well, will be able to work together and perform and perform better. And so, we still have to do some more work in order to really prove out that premise. But having done that piece of work actually really allowed us this year to help tell those stories and allow the commentators to start to talk about some of those relationships. So a lot of our work is giving commentators things to talk about, because the Tour de France broadcast, every day 5 hours. There's a lot of time to fill, and if we can give them really interesting data insights to help them on that journey, then they're going to be eternally grateful.
No doubt. That's so funny. Have you done because I'm just imagining with all the data you've collected and with all the predictions you guys can do, have you guys modeled in this next section, here's how we think the ride is going to go, and placement of the different teams?
Yeah, so we probably haven't quite got as far as that, but we're starting to make some steps towards that, and probably one of the interesting steps that we made this year was we introduced a new model that we called Le Buzz. And basically what Le Buzz does is that it looks at the shape and the movements of the riders within the peloton, and it is basically, then triggering alerts to say there's something going on here. There's a bit of a buzz in the peloton. Something might be about to happen. And what we observed is, as we looked at the outputs of that, we'd see it buzz, just before they entered a feed zone, for example, which is when the riders all reposition themselves, and there's a higher risk of crashing. We would get buzzes, more often than not, just before a crash occurred, because that was an indication that actually there's disturbance in the peloton, and that's more likely to be a crash. Or we'd get buzzes just before riders, went on the attack, as people position themselves potentially for a key climb. But this was actually, one of the things I love about this particular model. It actually came about by an internal hackathon competition that we ran called Le Code to France. And so we basically went to our whole organisation, and we've got 44,000 people in our company. We went out to the whole organisation and we said, here's a data set. Come up with some amazing things that will help, create, interesting fan engagement and tell stories, within the Tour de France. And this is one of the ideas that came out of that, which we then took and implemented this year as part of the Tour de France for the first time.
Wow, that is so cool. I think it's just fascinating that using machine learning, you're able to come up with these various predictions. And I love this. What was it called? The buzz?
Le buzz, because it's French.
Le buzz. I like that. That is so cool that you're even able to possibly predict the breakaways and even potential crashes based on what's happening in the ride.
Exactly. If you think about it, what machine learning is great at is pattern matching. And so, we're trying to look for patterns of behavior that then are indicators for, what's about to occur. That's what we tend to use, machine learning for, often within all sorts of different environments, and we're applying it to, the movements in the peloton in this case.
And I love the fact that you're also like using other data, like weather data, because that's fascinating too. Like the wind, the temperature can definitely impact the rider's ability to go hard when it's really, really hot. Are there other like data points that you wish you had to help inform your models?
I think, as I look at it, probably the piece that we don't have in many ways is the information that's not being captured by telemetry. So for example, if you've got a rider who has fallen ill, at the moment, that information doesn't come through our data sets. And so one piece that I'd ultimately like to start integrating would be something like, for example, pulling in some social media sentiment type analysis and information like that, or news, bringing in some sort of summaries of news feeds that then help to enrich the data set with what I'll call some of that soft, contextual information that at the moment we don't necessarily have within the more structured data sets of results and IoT telemetry and weather information. I think once if you can start to bring together more of that contextual information, then you can start to further improve your predictions. So an example of that would be we do a stage favourites prediction each day. And we did have one stage this year where one of the riders that we were predicting, or our model was predicting to perform well, the previous day he'd been involved in a crash, and the model doesn't know that at the moment, and so therefore the model is still predicting them to finish high up in the stage, which if he hadn't have crashed would have been a very sensible prediction. But the model didn't have that additional piece of contextual information. So I think the more that you can give, the model, that context, the more accurate that it can can become. But by the flip side, we've done a lot of work on identifying, what are the really important predictive elements, and quite often as you look at it, you actually realize that we might have 30 pieces of information that the model can look at, but it's probably only 5 or 6 of them that are really truly predictive, and it's important to sort of separate the noise from the really valuable predictive pieces of data. So as we sort of develop and tune our models and our data pipelines, we're always closely looking at what's really predictive, what's overly predictive, and overfits particular scenarios, and just trying to strike the right balance with those things.
Do things like the bike geometry, weight of the bike, tires, does that also make an impact when you're doing your analysis? Are you guys looking at that too?
No, we're not really, because I guess the premise that we're working on is that all these guys are racing, very high quality bikes, and yes, the bike is probably going to have some level of impact, but that's probably also to a large extent accounted for within looking at the riders' historical results. Typically, except for situations where they've just recently changed teams and maybe they're on a bike that's now much better or something like that. We've taken the view that that's probably not a highly predictive input, but also because they're all racing at such a high level and all the equipment is at such a high level, but also the ability it would be gathering that information from the teams would be a very difficult proposition, because they'll often ride different bikes for different stages. They'll choose one bike for the flat stages, a different bike for a mountain stage, and sometimes they'll even change bikes mid-stage in order to optimize their performance. So, a stage that maybe starts on the flat and then, the last 20 kilometers are a climb, they may actually do a planned bike change. We've seen this before. They're doing planned bike changes, before they hit the base of the climb. So they have the aero advantage on the flats and the weight advantage of a lightweight bike for the climbs.
How do the teams feel about sharing this data? Because obviously you don't want to give other teams competitive advantage. So I'm kind of curious, like how they feel about all this data being shared, and also what sort of data are they just not like, we're not sharing this particular aspect with you?
Yeah, so it's an area that I think is evolving for cycling, but it's also evolving for sports more generally. I think that in general, athletes and teams and clubs are starting to understand that being more open about data, there's a large appetite within fans to have more data, and that engaging fans it will require sharing that data. So that's definitely a mentality that teams are starting to understand more and more. But in saying that, there is also the balance of making sure that they're not giving away competitive advantage, and making sure also that we're not sharing information that can potentially make the racing dull and boring. So, in cycling, data like heart rate data and power data is quite sensitive. Now, the teams will allow that information to be shared at certain races for certain riders at certain periods of time, but they typically won't allow it to be shared for critical races, for critical riders at the really key moments, which is actually when, as fans, we really want to see it. And the reason for that is that if you've got the final climb up, let's say Tourmalet, the Queen stage of the Tour de France, and all the teams can see Chris Froome's heart rate and power. They know that they have a much better idea of how and when they should attack in order to hopefully, get that time gap. And, if everybody understands exactly where everybody else is, then you risk actually getting very negative and dull racing. And so it's one of those things where there's a risk that providing the fan with a great data experience could actually ruin the racing experience, because we've got great data, but actually the races become really boring because managing their efforts so tightly. So it is one of these tensions that we need to work, continue to work through, as a sport. But then the other element to this is around monetization of data, and so I think everybody is growing in the understanding that there is value in data, and so the teams and the riders are also trying to understand what that really means, and what does monetization of data mean, and who owns that data and who benefits from the monetization of that data. And I think if you look across the sporting world, there are different things starting to happen in different competitions, and and players and athletes agreeing to different things within their contracts around what data can be captured, how it can be used, where does their privacy start to play into this, particularly when you're starting to get biometric information. Mm-hmm. So it's quite a complex field, and I think it's still very much emerging, in terms of the more detailed discussions around how data can be used, and when it's useful, and when it starts to go past that line.
Yeah, it sounds very complex, because I'm thinking, like, as a fan, certain stats are like, and the stats that you guys are pulling in real time and sharing out, it's brilliant. And I'm like, this is so cool. I want to share this in the moment, because this is happening right now at top speeds right now. Gather these really cool insights, and then it's most valuable when it's happening in real time. Your team is able to share those insights, but you're right. Some of that stuff is like, well, is this going to make it? If you share too much, are you pretty much like telling them who's going to win? It's going to make the race kind of boring, because now it's like, oh, well, it's clearly who the winner is. Changing the channel. I already know who's going to win based on the data points.
Exactly. So our role with using the data is to help tell the story of the race, and to make the race interesting, and to provide data commentary. And so part of the job in doing that is an editorial job as much as it is a data job. And so you very much need to choose which parts of the story you're going to tell at which points in time. And things like a prediction about will the breakaway be caught by the peloton? Well, you're going to choose when you put out that prediction and when you share it, because if it's 99.999% that the chance that the breakaway is going to get caught, well, that's not a great storytelling aspect, because you actually destroy the interest. But we had a stage this year where we had a rider out the front, and our prediction was that there was 70% chance that this guy was going to get caught, and with about 20 kilometres to go. We put out that prediction, but the beauty of that was that he kept going, and then he managed to actually extend his gap out a bit and to retain that gap, and then the prediction changed and it became 50-50. Oh, now this is starting to get exciting. And then he ultimately he won the stage, and the story becomes that actually he only had a 30% chance of winning this stage, back 20 kilometres, from the finish. But he put in such a fantastic, phenomenal performance, and in that instance, the prediction actually helps to showcase what an incredible athletic performance that was. And so it's the whole piece around how do you use data to tell the story? And in our case, it's how do you use it to add to the excitement of the race and not to detract from the excitement of the race.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, the data storytelling aspect, because your team is coming up with predictions, data insights. You're then like, how do I then tell this story to make the Tour de France even more interesting, more engaging for fans without revealing too much to kind of spoil things?
Yep.
Right. And then also at the same time, like making sure that the insight or prediction is also been vetted through an analyst that like who knows cycling and be like looking at the data point going, no, there's no way, that's not going to happen.
That's right. And I guess that really comes to the team that we've put in place and the way that we work around this data. So we've obviously got teams that are involved in sort of developing a lot of the data pipelines and the models and those types of things. But in terms of this data storytelling role, and the channel that we use heavily with that is a Twitter feed called @LatourData, where we're feeding out these live predictions on Twitter, and then they also get featured onto the television broadcast. But the team who put that together, we've put together a data scientist who's mashing up the numbers and running the models and pulling out those predictions and creating visualizations.
Nice.
We've got a journalist, so we contract a journalist to work with us throughout the course of the tour, and so he's looking at it from a storytelling perspective, and what are the stories that we're going to tell, and then we have a marketing and social media person who's, well, okay, this is the story we want to tell. This is how we're going to present it. This is how we're going to use social media effectively to get that out, and this is the right sort of formats, etc. So bringing together those different skill sets, and they also then work closely with the television production team. Again, there'll be a lot of pre-planning ahead of the race, ahead of the stage. This is what kind of stage it is, today. These are the key points. These are the sorts of stories that we expect we're going to be telling at these different parts of the race. But we'll do all of that pre-planning, and then the race, something completely dramatic and different happens in the race than you expect, which is what happens in sport. And then, we throw all the work that we've done out and come up with a plan. And that's one of the beauties of working on a live sporting event.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, it's super, super exciting to be there, to be capturing all this data, providing analysis, sharing it with fans on social, sharing it with the news organizations. But it's exciting, but also super exhausting because it's like nonstop, like morning till night, and then you're like, oh, gotta do it again tomorrow.
Yeah. So the Tour de France, it's 3 weeks, 3 weeks long, or actually 3 weeks and 2 days. And it is by the end, everybody is just completely wrecked because you're right. It is full on. You get there, as I say, a few days before we do all the setup, we do all the testing. But once we're into the race, then you've got this rhythm, which is that you get up in the morning. For us, we're based at the race finish line for all of our work. So we travel to the race finish line. We set up for the day. We go through all our pre-race tests, etc. We do the stage, which is obviously very, very full on. Then as soon as the stage is finished, everything starts packing up, and so that whole technology zone of 100 trucks and wires everywhere all gets packed up and overnight transported to the next finish line. So we leave our technical truck, and we jump in our minivan. We usually drive for 2 to 3 hours to the next town that we're staying at overnight. Hopefully, get some food, some sleep, and then get up the next day. And the thing about the race is the grueling thing is that you're working long days, but you're traveling every single day as well. So you're living out of a suitcase for 3 weeks, and as a team, you're living in each other's pockets for 3 weeks, and so we're very, very fortunate to have a team who all get along really well, and we have a bit of a laugh and a bit of fun along the way, and that makes it go well, but it is definitely not for the faint-hearted.
No, it's out for sure. The amount of work involved, and the packing up and the long days, for sure. So, last question before we go. For data scientists who are like, Peter, this sounds amazing, would love to join your team. What do you look for someone who would be very successful on a team managing the Tour de France cycling analytics?
Yeah, so the things that we look for in people within the team, is a large element of pragmatism. So deep skills and generally broad skills, but the ability to apply that under pressure and be very pragmatic. And I think this applies to sports generally. In particular, it certainly applies to other industries as well, but certainly to sports. It's not an environment where you can architect the perfect world and implement it in a very regimented and structured way. It's a world that's highly dynamic. It's a world that the only thing you can guarantee is that things are going to go wrong and things are going to change. And so you've got to be able to be ready to go with the flow and adapt. And so, we've found that, people who maybe work extremely well in well-structured environments and might be hugely intelligent, and deeply capable in those types of environments can sometimes really struggle in this type of environment because the lack of structure, the pace of change, the on-site pressure to get things done, very, very quickly, and in an environment where actually sometimes getting it 80% right and quickly is much more important than getting it 100% right. And so, those types of personal attributes, are really important in these types of environments. And as I say, breadth is the other thing, because, typically in sports environments, you can't afford to say my job is just this. You actually have to be able to play across a range of different things. And you might be a specialist here, but you're also going to get involved in this and this. And so it's that breadth, So you got to be prepared to just, okay, we all need to help roll in the cables today. That's what's happening. We're all getting wet and dirty, pouring with rain, and that's what's happening today. We had a situation this year where there was a heat wave came through, and the generators that run the technical zone were overheating. It's like, okay, guys, air conditioning in the top half of all the trucks is going off. Everybody's migrating, and we're sitting on, we're working on bean bags and, sitting on steps to, with laptops on our laps, working. That was how we worked that stage. So, it's not just about the technical skills and the knowledge. They're definitely important. Yeah. But it's about the way of working and being able to adapt to those different environments.
That's brilliant. Before we go, so you do all this analysis for Tour de France. I'm curious, personally, when you're just bike riding at home, favorite apps, things you're doing to track your own cycling data?
Yeah, I'm probably like a lot of people's with Strava. I'm always on Strava. If it's not on Strava, it didn't happen, and all that kind of stuff. But I also have been using Zwift more and more, and I find for indoor training, using Zwift allows me to do it without getting bored, and the social interaction and the ability to join group rides or even do online races. And I think it's really fascinating the way that they're bringing together the worlds of esports and physical sports together. and actually our cycling team, Team Dimension Data, actually use Zwift in a really incredible way to do what they call the Zwift Academy, which allows anyone around the world to do this 6-week program. And out of that 6-week program, they select the best under 23 riders. They take the final 3 to the team's training camp, and basically the winner gets to join our continental development squad in Europe for 12 months.
Oh, wow.
And as a way of crowdsourcing talent identification from all around the world, that allows this is our team's a fairly small budget team. It's not Ineos and the guys who have $50 million a year. They're able to use this digital platform to crowdsource talent identification. It's just amazing sort of use of technology. And then for me, the other one is Today's Plan, and again, it's a platform that our cycling team use, and that's a training platform to keep tabs on all your rides, and your coach can put in the what you're meant to be doing and all that kind of stuff. But Strava's a lot of fun because it's very social.
Yeah, that is a lot of fun. It's so funny down in here in Orange. Sometimes when I go mountain biking, you'll hear guys, racing downhill, screaming Strava, like get out of my way. Basically, I'm trying to PR. They're like this close to just throwing their phone down the mountain to get the better PR.
The thing that I love is, in my job, I travel a lot, and I often try to take my bike wherever I go. And so using platforms like Strava, I can identify where to go riding by using, their routing tools and their heat map. I can turn up to some place that I've never been in before in my life, and I can go, okay, I want to do a 50K ride, map something out, and inevitably we end up with a great ride, because if you follow the roads that lots of other riders use regularly, cyclists tend to like going along nice roads and riding in nice places. And so myself and my colleague Tim, we take our bikes with us at the tour, and so we do try to get out for a ride each morning, and we've discovered amazing places by using that Strava functionality to plot out our routes each day.
That's brilliant. That is so cool. Well, Peter, thank you so much for being a guest on Data Talk. It's been awesome chatting with you and learning from you. For those that want to get in touch, follow you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so probably the best way is actually to certainly follow at La Tour Data, coming up to the to the Tour de France, and follow at Global NTT, or NTT Global on Twitter, and you'll find all sorts of pieces of information. We have on our website a whole section devoted to the Tour de France, and there's various videos and articles, some of which I've been involved in putting together. That's the best way.
Awesome. For those listening to the podcast, make sure to check them out. I'll also put links to those different social media handles, as well as Peter's LinkedIn account on the Experian Global News blog. The short URL is just ex.pn/Peter Gray. Again, that's ex.pn/Peter Gray. And that'll bring you over to the blog post with the video and links to ways to connect with Peter, as well as various activities he's doing for the Tour de France. Peter, thank you again for your time. Awesome chatting with you.
Yeah, great fun. Thanks, Michael.
Take care.
Cheers.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for checking out this episode of the Data Talk podcast. My name is Mike Delgado, and we record this show every single week on Facebook Live. If you found this show helpful, please let us know by rating us on iTunes. And if you want to know about past episodes or upcoming ones, you can always go to the Experian blog. The URL is just experian.com/datatalk. Again, that's experian.com/datatalk. And that'll bring you over to the page where we have a listing of all of our show notes and past episodes. We've recorded over 100 so far. And we're also looking for your recommendations. So if you ever have suggestions around topics or guests you'd like to hear from, please let us know. You can reach out to us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @Experian Data Lab, or you can just reach me directly @Mike Delgado. Thanks so much for your support, and thanks so much for subscribing to our shows.